Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Those just joining, we just opened the door to let you all flood in. You're joining a webinar about EAA documentation requirements. If you don't recognize those words, you're probably in the wrong place. Welcome. And we've got a few hundred people registered today, so we'll be a little while just setting up, getting you all in. And in a moment, I'll tell you a bit about the housekeeping, but I'm Mark Walker from AbilityNet. And the first thing to mention is if you do need captions, then we have captions today provided by Microtext, and you can show them by clicking on the Show Captions button at the bottom of the screen on your Zoom window. And they're also provided as stream text version, which you can look at on a web page, which is available here, streamtext.net/player ? The event name equals AbilityNet. We will be recording this, and we will be sharing any of the documents you see. And we will be doing some FAQs and other notes afterwards. And any questions and answers that don't get answered today, we'll do our best to answer afterwards and share those around as part of the resources from the event. So we're just to let you know, that means anything you see today you can get access to. Any of the links, if you need them, just tell us. If you could use the question and answer box to ask us questions, and then we can keep track of the various questions that people may have. And my first question is, can you hear me? And could somebody just let me know in the question and answer box that all of the stuff I'm saying is heard? Brilliant. Thanks, Patrick. Hi, Sam. Thank you. Hey, Jeremy. Bonjour. And I should also say I'm in a room where sometimes there's been a bit of noise in the background coming and going. So there may be times when you hear some odd noises. It's just the room I'm in. I'll do my best to mute in between any chat that we're doing. Great. How many have we got in? Yep. Let's keep going and give it another couple of minutes. We're getting triple figures and beyond. Hi, Rachel. What else can I see in here? Hi, Lucy. So Lucy Ruck there on the list. Hey, Sabine. Hello. That's Suzette. The alumni are in. Great. Well, welcome everybody. This is part 3 of a 3 webinar series. So we're going to go through various slides, but we're going to focus on documentation for the European Accessibility Act. We're going to check in a minute to see what your current knowledge is of the EAA. But please be aware, we're largely assuming that you have done at least some homework on the other questions that we've raised. So when we get to the point about what your current knowledge is, it doesn't matter if you don't have any, but just be aware that some of your questions maybe that we don't answer directly could be related to things we answer in another webinar. And I'll mention that a couple of times because to some extent the documentation pulls the whole thing together. So there will be things that may not be clear, but we don't necessarily have time to backtrack. Can we have the first slide, please, Kelly? So we're going to go through a couple of intros and explain some context for you to understand what we've got to cover today and what we're not covering, as I said. We're going to look at documentation. It's a key part of the European Accessibility Act. If you're in scope and you don't publish documentation, then you're not compliant, irrespective of whether the thing you do is compliant. If you don't publish any documentation, you haven't met the requirements. So we're going to talk a bit about some of the scenarios, and we're going to talk a bit about what the format of that might look like. And where we can, we're going to answer questions that have been asked during the previous webinars. So that's sort of driven by the Q&A that if you've participated before, we're using the Q&A from the previous sessions, but there is a chance today to ask any questions that you like. As I say, please use the question and answer thing. Do it anytime. If you've arrived today with a burning question, let us know it now. We can keep track of the different questions that are coming in, and we can keep providing answers, and we can also take away all those questions and provide answers afterwards. So the more you drop your questions in, the more it guides what we do through the next 45 minutes or so. And at the end, we'll talk about next steps, and there may be some questions you have about next steps as well, not just about the documentation, but what should I do now? We are, 6 weeks away from the deadline, so we're getting to the point where you should be doing something next. We'll be reviewing that and making sure that you've got answers to those questions, or at least pointers to where to look for that. Great. Next slide, please. So the three of us on the webinar today. I'm Mark Walker from AbilityNet. I've been sort of developing our work around. I'm the head of marketing, looking at EAA for some time through our events. I'll get Alice and Louis to introduce themselves. First, over to you, Alice.
Hi everyone, I'm Alice. I'm a Principal Accessibility Consultant at AbilityNet, and I've been working with Mark a lot on the EAA as well. Over to you, Louis.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Louis Asquith. I'm an Associate Regulatory and Public Law Associate at Russell Cook LLP, and it's been a pleasure to work with AbilityNet, and we'll be continuing to work with AbilityNet on the European Accessibility Act, and as principally to provide businesses with a one-stop shop to ensure compliance.
Great, thank you. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to mention the two sort of types of expertise that you're going to run through, because they're becoming increasingly important as we've done this series. So AbilityNet is an accessibility specialist. We've been doing this for 25 odd years. So what we're looking at is really things like the testing and the documentation is what we're working at with the with our customers and our clients, and the advice that we provide is very much focused on accessibility. But the reason Louis and ourselves and Russell Cook have been working together is because there are quite a lot of questions in here that divide neatly into what's the legal requirement and what's the best practice. So from an accessibility point of view, we probably work mainly in the best practice field. That's not only the case, but that's typically where we come from. Of course, you may be looking at what's the specific legal requirement, and you may have people in your organization asking legal questions. We would say we're not legal advisors and you need to get legal advice. And hence today we've got that combination, excuse me, of Alice and Louis with their respective expertise. So you sort of expect to hear those two sides to the same story sometime. You know, this is the legal picture, this is the accessibility view. So, and that's becoming clear, and I think it's useful for you to know that that is some of the ways you need to think about this. So next slide, which I think is the poll. Great, so we're going to pop up a poll. If you could let us know what level of expertise you've got. This has been really helpful for us just to make sure that we either do cover things in depth if we have people here who are looking with really specific questions, but also not to leave people too far behind if this is all relatively new to you. Great, we've got most of you in. I'm just going to give it another moment or two. Yeah, great, that's pretty much settled down now. I'm just going to show you. So more than half of you have said that you have basic needs. I'm just going to share the results, and I'll read it as well. So 6% of people are saying that they are an expert and they lead EAA compliance. That's a very small proportion. So it may be that some of your questions we need to get and maybe answer them in a little bit more detail. Bear that in mind. Just let us know when we haven't given enough detail. There are people who say they're advanced and they understand its requirements and the implication for my organization. And then half the people say, I know the EAA exists, but need guidance. So we need to just make sure we pitch it at that level where we don't go too far into the detail without recognizing that some people need that. But it does make me mention, we have a guide that you can download, which will tell you things like what's in scope, how do you test it, some of the basics are all out there. And that's previous content for this webinar. So we may leave some of that as something you need to go and look at afterwards. Great. Thank you very much for filling that in. Next slide, please, Kelly. So I'm just going to show you some of the questions which we're going to look at today, and just again keep mentioning. And the reason there are 3 parts here is because we quite quickly realised that there's quite a lot that you need to get your teeth into here. And when we get into the documentation stuff, bear in mind that we're going to assume largely that you're in scope, because if you're turning up today and you don't know if you're in scope, we're not going to answer that today. So when you look through the old resources, the previous resources we published, and when you look at the guide, and when you start looking at the guidance and potentially getting legal advice, it would be to find out whether this actually applies to you. And that's not a simple question. It's not a yes, no. There is a list. There are lots of gray areas. It doesn't only include websites and apps and products and services. It's all sorts of communications wrapped around it. So just bear that in mind. We're not going to delve too deeply in that today, because that's what was in the first webinar. Secondly, we looked at testing and standards. This is probably not so much relevant today, other than the fact that you will need to conduct tests to demonstrate your accessibility compliance. If you haven't heard of EN 301549, I'm afraid we're going to assume today that that's something you need to get to know. We will hear it referenced, and you'll hear occasional things we say, but that testing and standard stuff is the meaty bit. And to some extent, it's the accessibility bit. It's the bit where people are trying to work out the connection between the web content guidelines and EN 301549. Again, not today's topic. What we are going to look at is what documents do you need to publish, particularly to think about compliance. As I say, in the first instance, if you publish no documents, you're not compliant. So you do need to publish something, and we're going to look at how what the regulations say about that, because there's lots of guidance in the regulation, and we're going to leave you to do that homework, because one size doesn't fit all. And then what sorts of records do we need to keep? I think it's important for you to know that you are meant to be keeping records to be compliant, so that if the monitoring authority comes to you and asks for information, that you can present that information, particularly to do with the decisions you take as you go along. And we'll cover that, just to demonstrate that it's not just what you're putting on your website. It's not just an accessibility statement. If you're in scope, this is putting some work in your teams to keep track of the decisions you're taking, so that you can look back on those should anybody complain in the future. Great. Next slide, please. So, Alice, you're going to talk us through some scenarios, and I'll probably just jump in. I'll keep my eye on the questions, but I'll jump in if there's anything I think is just one of those little basic questions or something that maybe somebody's asking in the Q&A.
Sure thing. Thanks, Mark. Hi, everyone. So yes, today, oh, Mark, would you be able to go on mute just for your background noise? Thank you. Yeah, so today I'm just going to talk about some documentation scenarios. So the first one being if you're in scope and you are declaring compliance. In this scenario, you'd need to produce an accessibility statement and some internal documentation, as Mark was just talking about. And then the second scenario is if you are in scope, but you're declaring non-compliance. So this isn't that you're not compliant, it's if you are declaring something like a fundamental alteration or disproportionate burden, and we'll talk a bit about that later on. And for this one, you do need to document an assessment for this one. Just a note as well, we're going to be talking specifically about the requirements for services. So we're not going to be talking about the documentation requirements for products. There are different requirements for that. This is specifically about the documentation requirements for services. Next slide, please, Kelly. So we'll start by talking about accessibility statements. So if you are in scope, you do need to provide certain information, and this could be provided in an accessibility statement. So in the European Accessibility Act, under Article 13.2, it says, service providers shall prepare the necessary information in accordance with Annex V and shall explain how the services meet the applicable accessibility requirements. The information shall be made available to the public in written and oral format, including in a manner which is accessible to persons with disabilities. So this needs to be provided by everyone that is in scope. It needs to be available to the public and kept as long as the service is in operation as well. And there are set requirements of what to include in this, and this is listed within Annex V, Annex 5 within the EAA documentation, and we'll have a look at that in a moment. Unlike PSBAR, so this is the public sector bodies accessibility regulations, there is currently no sample template that we've seen. There may well be one developed in the future, and at AbilityNet we are looking to develop one to help support our clients with this. Next slide, please, Kelly. So this is just showing the what the Annex V is. So this is within the European Accessibility Act itself, within the directive. So there's a link on the slide if you've not actually looked at the directive yourself yet. But Annex V clearly states what information you need to provide within the accessibility statement. So this information here, it details exactly what you need to look at. And then next slide, please, Kelly. This is it, just pulled out again, just detailing exactly what's said within that Annex 5. So definitely would recommend having a look at this.
So Alice, can I just mention that
Yeah.
there was a general point here that we were going to make, because we're in the third episode of this 3-part series. Have a look at the Act, have a look at these things on the website. There's lots of information in there which will apply to you and maybe not to the other people on this call because of the particular things you do. Products and services is a good example. Just understanding the definition. The way we're reading services is primarily websites, and apps fall into that category. That's why we can talk to that, because that's the accessibility stuff we do. But if we've been talking to Sony, for example, about what they're doing with TVs, that's the sort of stuff that's under the product heading. So go and have a look at that. If this is the first time that you've jumped in, don't be afraid of looking at the Act. That's why we showed you the screenshot. Go and have a look at it. There's loads of useful information there that will begin to bring it to life for you in terms of what you need to do in your organization. So that's why we're showing you this sort of stuff. It's there and you can read it, and it will apply to you in different ways.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I can see there's a question in the chat as well, which is just about where can you find the documentation requirements for products? And yeah, you're absolutely right. It's in the Act. It is all detailed there. So do have a look at that. And there was a link on the previous slide. Next slide, please, Kelly. I just wanted to talk a bit about existing documentation. So you might already, accessibility statement, you might already have one. Or documentation like you might have other documentation. And a question we often get asked is this enough? I can see there's a question related to this in the chat already. So I'll just talk a bit about the kind of different types that you might have. So the first one I called as a voluntary accessibility statement. This, you may already be providing an accessibility statement. This is absolutely fantastic if you are, as it is a really valuable resource for your users. In this, it might detail the accessibility features of the platform, provide a point of contact, provide a way for users to reach out to you to register if there's any problems that they face. Or it might also contain information about known areas that don't meet the requirements. And as I said, this is a really, really valuable resource for users. However, this type is intended to help users and not to meet the legal requirements. Then you might also have a public sector body's accessibility regulation, so a PSBAR accessibility statement. You may provide some of the information that I've just mentioned, but there is set wording that is required. And there is also a template that you can follow for this. So a template has been provided. This is needed to meet legal requirements. So like the EAA, documentation is also a part of, is also required to meet the requirements of PSBAR. However, it requires similar but not the same information to the European Accessibility Act. So do bear that in mind. And then you might also have a VPAT or an ACR. These are a voluntary product accessibility template or an accessibility conformance report. These documents detail how a service meets set standards. So, for example, how it meets WCAG. You might have had one put together after you've had an audit. And these documents go into a lot more technical detail than you might have on an accessibility statement. So with the EAA documentation, it does need to have include specific information, which I mentioned is in Annex 5. And this is detailed in the directive. This can be added to your existing accessibility statement. Within the directive, it says it should be provided in the general terms general terms and conditions, or in an equivalent document, and that equivalent document could be your accessibility statement. And still do make sure you're still thinking about your users. So while the requirements of the EAA require you provide set information, as a best practice, we would always say to think about your users, still have that information in there about having it as a valuable resource for your users. So the accessibility features of your platform, having a point of contact, any known areas that you can share that you know about that don't meet the requirements. And also the requirements are not the same as the PS bar. So even if, like I said, if you do have an accessibility statement for PS bar, the requirements are slightly different for EAA. And providing a VPAT or ACR alone is not enough to meet the these external documentation requirements. Next slide,
Alice,
please.
I was
Oh,
just
sorry,
going, could I just mention something on that one?
Yeah.
We could just go back. I think one of the things that I've picked up, and we're talking about this in terms of how we then move on beyond June, is that when you're doing two things here, you're talking to the monitoring authority to explain that you think you've met the requirements, and that's what your documentation is doing. It's speaking to them. They're going to come and look at your site and say that we want to check that you've actually done what you're meant to do. So that's one element of this. And then, as you mentioned, the other one, which is maybe the more best practice, is speaking to the users of your service. But it's worth mentioning that within the Act, there is mention of how you document your services for your users and how you make sure they understand the accessibility features. So those are the two audiences for this documentation, really. And I think that helps sort of understand that you're speaking to someone, you're putting this here so somebody can read it to check things. And the public sector regulations that some people on this call will be familiar with, that did that really well. It really brought standard to it. But that, again, in that case, the template came after the publication of the regulation. So we will see that, I think, that, you know, it will become more of a standard of how monitoring authorities are looking for information and what they're looking for. Just worth mentioning, that's why we're working on it with our clients, because it's just becoming clear now what those requirements would be. So anybody looking for a template, that's why there isn't one out there. They haven't published one yet. And the monitoring authorities are going to go looking for information, and they're probably going to start telling you exactly what they're looking for in regard to what the documentation says from the Annex 5. So just to explain, you're not missing something. If you think somewhere there's a magical document or a template, there just isn't. That's just not here yet. So it's really down to your current circumstances, your reading of what you've got to do for the Act and how you're complying with it. And that's why these other documents are not sufficient, because that won't cover all of the questions the monitoring authorities would like to add. I hope that helps set the context of it not being enough and we're not telling you.
Thanks, Mark. Next slide, please, Kay. Thank you. So we just talked about the external publicly facing documentation requirements for if you are in scope. Sorry, 1 second. So now we're going to look at the internal documentation requirements. So if you are in scope, you also do need to keep documentation internally detailing how you have met the requirements. So under Article 13.5 in the European Accessibility Act, it says that service providers shall, further to a reasoned request from a competent authority, provide it with all information necessary to demonstrate the conformity of the service. So if requested, the service provider needs to provide information showing how it has actually met the requirements of the Act. And this needs to be readily available if it's been requested. And the information should show how the service meets accessibility requirements. So this could be a VPAT or an ACR or an audit, or it could be user research or roadmaps. It's kind of any information to demonstrate that you are meeting the requirements. The June deadline as well, so June 28th, it's not something that can be met and forgotten about. The EAA does require that continuous conformance as well. So as a best practice at AbilityNet, we do recommend that you just keep a record of everything that you are doing towards the European Accessibility Act. So if you had an internal call to discuss requirements, if you had a call with an external provider or had an audit, have it all recorded so that if you're asked for it, you can provide it. And you could also have it as a roadmap to show how you are planning to go about fixing any known issues as well. Like an accessibility statement, like the external accessibility statement, this does also need to be kept as long as the service is in operation, and it needs to be updated when there are updates to the service. Unlike the accessibility statement, this does not need to be available publicly. It just needs to be available when requested by a competent authority. However, as a best practice, again, we would also recommend that if you can share any information with your users. So for example, if you can share a plan of when you plan to fix issues, this can be really helpful information for your users, and can show commitment and just be really useful for them to see when you plan to look at those fixes. Next slide, please, Kelly. So we talked about the two scenarios, the scenarios about when you're in scope and you need to declare compliance. And now we're going to look at declaring fundamental alteration or disproportionate burden. So there may be scenarios where you are in scope for the requirements of the European Accessibility Act, but you're not able to meet those requirements. So Article 14 says, the accessibility requirements referred to in Article 4 shall apply only to the extent that compliance does not require a significant change in a product or service that results in a fundamental alteration of its basic nature, and does not result in the imposition of a disproportionate burden on the economic operators concerned. So if you are going down this route and declaring fundamental alteration or disproportionate burden, you do need to carry out an assessment and determine that. And this needs to be documented. There is already there is an exemption to the Act. So if you are a micro enterprise, you are automatically exempt. And a micro enterprise is a business which employs fewer than 10 people and which has an annual turnover or balance sheet total not exceeding 2 million euros. Otherwise, if you are in scope, then this may be something you need to look at. You need to do an assessment on the above, and it needs to be documented. You do need to keep it for 5 years from when the service was last made available, and if requested, a copy must be provided. However, it is worth noting, this is by no means an easy process, and it will not be accepted lightly as well. There are set criteria that you need to meet, and this is listed under Annex VI in the EAA documentation, directive. It's also not permanent, so there are things you would need to reassess it as well. If you are claiming disproportionate burden, then the assessment must be renewed when the service is altered, or if you're requested to do so by the authorities, or every 5 years. You also need to have a plan of how you go about fixing it as well. And do note that if you have received external funding for improving accessibility, then you cannot claim disproportionate burden as well. This, as I said, this scenario, it's if you are in scope, but there may be reasons where you might need to declare fundamental alteration or disproportionate burden. You still need to provide documentation for that as well. Next slide, please, Kelly. So just to recap, we've talked about the in-scope requirements for declaring compliance and the requirements of having that externally facing documentation, which could be provided in your accessibility statement, and then having internal documentation. And then we also looked at in-scope and declaring non-compliance. So this would be for reasons such as fundamental alteration or disproportionate burden. And for this, you'd need to provide documentation in the form of documenting that assessment. So I'll now hand back to Mark for the questions. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. And apologies for the background noise. There was somebody mentioning it. I'll jump in and then maybe leave you guys to answer these. I'm going to pick up on one here. The cart and the horse. The fact that there appears to be some sort of need for clarity and specific information, but on the other hand, there hasn't been a template published. I mean, that's the particular reason that that's difficult. I listened to, or I was talking to somebody from the Irish Monitoring Authority, and their starting position is that you need to be compliant, but that's their goal. They want you to be compliant. They don't want to fine you. They don't want to go through a process of causing trouble. They want you to be compliant. So if they come across something which isn't as compliant as it could be, then their feedback is going to be, here's some of the things you need to do, rather than immediately jumping on you because you've missed some, missed a comma or not understood a relatively hidden piece of information. And I think that's where the custom and practice will come from over time, which is monitoring authorities in all 27 countries will behave slightly differently, but in the middle of all of that, there will be what they all do. And the template will probably arise from that. But I'll just ask Louis to comment on that one, because I think
Yeah.
that is the difference between trying to work out exactly what you meant to say and exactly what the regulators are trying to do. This is sort of somewhere in that area, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. Thank you. It's kind of it's given me a bit of an echo around of when the GDPR was when it first became effective, and you know, lots of organisations, businesses didn't know what they had to do to be compliant, and you know, ever since the GDPR became effective, we've continued learning and improving how those requirements are met. And I use that as an analogy because I think it will be quite similar in this regard. The worst thing a business can do is try and excuse themselves from actively trying to comply by saying, well, I didn't really get it. Because the fact is the EAA is there, and I really would repeat the sentiments around reading and going to the act itself, the directive itself, because you might be surprised how accessible actually it is, in terms of it's not the most sort of legally jargony document I've ever read. So do go and have a look at it. But the absolute headline here is that if you are in scope or potentially in scope, do not procrastinate looking at what you can do. And I mean, when I come to a few questions that I'm going to answer, the principle here is transparency, and you should be led by transparency as you're moving forward. So not trying to deviate away from the reality, the actions that your business is taking. It's clear, or as clear as it can be currently, what will be expected of your business, and you need to be ready to illustrate what you're doing, what you've done, and what you're going to do in order to get there. So I mean, a longer way of saying what you said, really, Mark, but yeah, I just want to really push and highlight the need for proactiveness from those attending and those wondering what they need to do. Seek the advice, seek the support, and make sure you're ticking the boxes, because you may be asked to show what you've done. There's provision for that under the directive, and you need to be ready to produce it.
And I when asked about this, Donald from Ireland was asked, what should I do if we're not ready? He said, the problem is I'm a regulator. You must be compliant is the only answer I'm going to give you. But he also said, you need to speak to your advisors. What does the accessibility or your legal advice say to you about what you're doing and whether it feels appropriate? So that is that bit that you need to be doing now, and just judging for yourselves as an organization whether this feels like you're making the efforts that you should be making. And the details will come through, I think, over time, exactly as you said about GDPR. People were in a very different position on the first day of GDPR than they were now in terms of the way that certain requirements are interpreted. So that's the point of this, really, is doing nothing is not the answer, but doing what you think is the right thing is the beginnings of the, and somebody asked here about how frequently it needs to be updated. There are some requirements in there for you to change when the service changes or is updated, and there is some definitions in there about when that is and what would be required to count as I now need to do another statement. But those all have to be tested yet and understood a bit more fully, because they're not clear for every single product or service that's covered by the Act. So those things will become a bit clearer as well.
Yeah, if you look to Article 14 in reference to that, so it deems a fundamental alteration to the product or service that you're delivering. So as I say, if you look to Article 14, that covers that particular point.
Great. Can we have the next slide, please, Kelly?
Aha.
So I'll leave you two to do this between you, then you won't have to worry about the background noise.
No problem. I'll launch in. Alice, if you're happy for me to.
Yeah, or I can read you the question, you can answer if you like.
Sure, go for it.
Let's go for
that. Team approach, yeah.
Yeah. So first question, I might be in scope. If I'm not, do I still need to provide documentation to prove that I'm not in scope?
Yeah, okay. So it's a really, really good question, this. So there's no explicit requirement under the directive for those out of scope to declare their status as being out of scope. However, I'd pull us back again to the principle of transparency and proactiveness and the overarching aim of the directive as well, and invite businesses to consider irrespective of there not being, as I say, an explicit requirement, can you, or essentially put up a short statement, perhaps on your website, making it clear that you have reviewed the position as a business and concluded that it's not in scope at the current time. And again, we come back to that principle. This is a live situation. Your businesses will be developing, growing, evolving, and who knows what it'll look like in 5 years' time. And it's important that you keep the issue of scope under review. And having something on your website might trigger you to think about that more regularly or more routinely. So, for instance, if you have it as a routine consideration, that the senior management board, whatever, whoever deals with your decisions within the business, is considering whether that statement is still correct. Say, well, relative to your business, it might be 6 months, it might be 4 weeks, it might be 5 days, whatever it is. Making sure you're thinking about whether you are in scope, I think, is a really prudent and sensible thing to do. Another point I'd just make in relation to that is that there may be situations that you as a business are asked for sort of formal confirmation, if you will, as to whether you are in scope or not, or why you deem yourself to be exempt in practice. So, for instance, if there's a regulatory review, you might be asked questions around that. Or practices or exercises of due diligence, for instance, if you're selling a business or whatever, if you're carrying out some kind of transaction. So I think it's about thinking ahead, again, leading with the principles of transparency and proactiveness, and not just committing yourself to it. Okay, well, there's no explicit requirement, therefore we don't have to do it, because in actual fact, a short declaration won't take long. As I must stress against that, if you can and are able, please do seek advice to ensure that that position is correct. Because even if you've done a load of work internally at your business and you think, yeah, I'm pretty confident this is right, but it is technically wrong, yes, you will have an opportunity to explain and justify your position, but you'll be in a far stronger position have you obtained that advice that you can leave with, and hopefully avoid any mistakes doing it without obtaining formal advice. So yeah, no explicit requirement, but I would encourage businesses to look beyond that and invite themselves to do that little bit extra, and to avoid work that you might have to do later down the line anyway.
Thanks, Louis. And then the next question was, I operate in more than one of the member states. What documentation should I use for this? Yeah.
So I think, as ever with these things, businesses will have to be considered within their own context. How many member states and what way are they providing services to those to individuals within those member states, to businesses within those member states. So really, as I say, as ever with this directive, we're unable to give you a blanket answer. What I would say is that, again, the principle of transparency has to lead you in answering this. So whilst the directive doesn't require you necessarily to list each member state that you're delivering into, if your services are adapted in a particular way for a member state, in accordance with the particular regulations of that member state, then it may be prudent and indeed correct, as I say, fact dependent, on making that explicit. So it may be that actually, when you dig into the facts and dig into the context of your business, that an accessibility declaration does cover each jurisdiction when you're offering something, as I say, into that state itself that can be distinguished. So as ever, when you're dealing with regulatory issues, providing, I'm hesitating because providing enough information obviously is crucial. Providing as much as you can, as I say, to illustrate diligence, to illustrate a proactive effort, are always going to be positive things and will reflect well in principle. So again, it's similar to the answer to question 1. So there's no explicit requirement, but looking at the objective of the directive, looking at the fact that each member state, and certainly as we move forward, member states may differ from each other as to what they're requiring in nuanced ways. detailing that out will be, I think, a prudent thing to do. Again, seeking advice within the context of your business is really important.
Thanks, Zoe. Yeah, I think that is a good point of like it is just continually reviewing seems like a good way to go as well, just making sure that you're always there. And the next question was, can we, so this, again, people might already have a PSBAR accessibility statement. So if they do, can they use that existing PSBAR accessibility statement and add a line about EAA, or does it need to be a separate statement?
I would say a separate statement. I think it's really important to remember that they are separate things and separate. They require separate have separate requirements. Sorry, and making the difference clear is only ever going to be sensible. And I know that you touched on this earlier, Alice. The directive asks for a declaration in relation to the directive itself, the European Accessibility Act. So you need to deliver on that.
Thank you. There's a question come through in the chat which relates to the one above about the member states of wouldn't the documentation be the same for each member state if the idea was to have harmonization?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, it speaks to the fact that we're at the very beginning of this, and I think certainly a statement that reflects that harmony is the starting point. I suppose what I was getting at is that it's important to interrogate whether there are any distinguishments or differences between states, and that may occur as things evolve, but yeah, it may be that one statement suits all.
Sorry, can I just mention that, because this is something from a previous session that was relevant here, is that to the best of our knowledge, there's not a completely detailed resource right now that will tell you the difference between what they're asking for in France and Germany, but there are libraries starting to appear, at least detailing which authorities are taking a lead in those countries and identifying what their policies are and potentially identifying any subtle differences between what's required in each country. We've been asked quite a lot, where can we find one of those? And we want one as well. That's because, as you said, we're right at the beginning of that process. I think I read that there is something in France that was different and in addition to, but it related to documentation, but these are just beginning to emerge for that point of view of looking across the multiple countries rather than sort of saying, well, what am I meant to do differently in Greece and Germany and anything else? That information is not right now as clear as it's going to be, as we start moving forward beyond the deadline. So
I think as well, it's important to note the main differences, I imagine, will be in relation to what penalties are imposed between member states. I mean, I think that is perhaps where we'll see the, as I say, the most immediate differences in state approach.
There's been a few questions in the chat about third parties and documentation for that. So there's one about how do you document third party services, products or services, and then another one about, in regards to documentation, how would you approach non-compliance in services you offer that are controlled by a third party?
Yeah, I mean, the first, my initial thoughts would be that, businesses are responsible for their own businesses. If you are working with a third party that isn't compliant, you're going to have to take a judgment call as to whether that continues, whether you can encourage that business to ensure compliance, etc. But my instinct is that the business that is not compliant will be the one that's responsible for that non-compliance, if that makes sense. But again, looking more broadly at the directive and its objective, if you become aware as a business that that's happening, then there needs to be some internal questioning going on.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's with like companies with all, it's so common to have those third party bits, isn't it? So I'm sure it's going to come up as a question.
Can I just mention that there's another question here this relates to about having policies within your business relating to the EAA. This is a really specific question about procurement. When we work with people around strategy and process and decision making, relating to EEA, relating to accessibility. And, you know, you set a goal for being the most accessible bank in the world, for example, and then your procurement team lets you buy a third-party plugin which is completely inaccessible, and you've broken that promise to try and achieve accessibility. That's a procurement problem and a policy problem at that point. And I think that's what will happen here, that it will be necessary to show that you've bought, you know, you bought something under a policy that showed you thought it should be accessible. I think that's the advice I've been picking up, that
Yeah, but
you know,
I'd go
that you made
further.
that decision, particularly if it's the main part of your website and it's the main thing that people are engaging with, and it's not accessible. It's made your service inaccessible. So just to be really clear, to me, that's a procurement question, really, inside the organization, that somebody thinks it's okay to buy something that's not accessible. That's the sort of broader strategy piece, which needs to be considered internally, and policy and other things mentioned here.
Yeah, but I think what I'd add to that, Mark, is that it comes back to the issue of due diligence. You know, you need to be adding this to your list of due diligence that you're reviewing before purchasing products, and you know, that you'll be using to help you deliver your services. Sort of saying, well, it's a policy issue. I agree with you. You know, there's an internal question that needs to be asked there, but there's a responsibility before purchasing that you've carried out the relevant due diligence before doing so.
Thanks, Zoe. We had another question on the slide, which is, what if we only meet, so what if a company only meets 80% of the requirements with our best efforts? What should they do in the documentation scenario there?
Yeah, so great question, and I imagine, you know, many businesses will be in this position as well. You know, they've become aware of the requirements, the deadline. They've been doing their best to be in a position of 100% compliant, and they can see the time running away, and they're not quite there. I bring us back to the principle of transparency. Still ensure that you have your declaration on your website. And I suppose what's interesting here is, I mean, we're asking for a template, etc. And what's the flexibility allows you to provide nuance as to your situation. So being transparent about what you've done and the compliance that you've managed to attain. But also, we come back to the point that Alice made earlier about sort of having a roadmap, being able to illustrate what you're doing to get to that 100%. So even if you're not there yet, and hopefully businesses are working to be there, but if even after all the efforts, you're still not there, don't obviously, I mean, it's always worth saying, don't be dishonest about it, first up and you know, utmost and foremost, but ensuring that you're not going, oh, we missed it, you know, chuck away the papers and we tried our best, you know, making sure you're maintaining a proactiveness so you can illustrate to the regulator that you understand where you are, you understand what you need to do, and you've got X, Y, Z in place to get there. And working promptly and efficiently is also important.
Thanks. I guess in this scenario, we're talking about a situation where you might know how far off you are, but if a company is currently in a position where they don't know their compliance levels, what about in that scenario?
Well, they need to understand it, you know, and that's, I mean, that brings all these three webinars together, working out if you're in scope, working out what testing needs to take place, and then obviously working out what paperwork you need in place. And I think it's about looking at that in the whole. But yeah, certainly if you're not even at the point of knowing what you need to do, then, you know, you need to crack on, quite frankly. And you have the time to do that, but dawdling isn't encouraged at this point.
Thanks, Louis.
Can I just mention, I'm going to answer Adam's question here about the multiple having a domino effect where somebody complains in one country and then you become, you know, then the same complaint and legal challenge goes across countries. Louis, I think my reading at the moment, I'm wondering whether GDPR is a model for this, because it's not clear at the moment. I think I've heard some versions of this, but I'm assuming that if the complaint is raised in Greece and dealt with by the Greek monitoring authority, then to some extent, the other monitoring authorities recognise that because that's part of the process that they've committed to. I'm not quite clear what happens if somebody then complains in Germany whilst that complaint's been dealt with in Greece. That's the bit I think that's a little bit unclear. I don't know whether you've got any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the answer for definite. My instinct, based on experience, would be that each state regulator would deal with issues within their own right, and it comes back to the point that I think the main distinguishment between member states will be how they deal with potential non-compliance and the possible penalties as a result of that. So it may be that we see in due course that a particular member state is very proactive in ensuring compliance, and there may be a more relaxed member state as a result of it. But I don't think businesses can rely on the idea that if one member state's regulator is asking questions, another won't also. So I'd be very careful about that.
I think just to underline the bit I picked up that from the Irish regulator sort of lead, it was that if a complaint is raised, they will pursue it. They're required to. So if somebody in Ireland complains about your service, the regulator is 100% required to show that they've pursued that complaint. And I'm guessing those same rules largely will apply to other regulators, depending on which bodies they are and how they're responding. So it is possible that would happen. I don't think in the spirit of what they're trying to do in the harmonisation that they want to have 27 different pieces of action underway against one particular provider who's failing for the same reason in 27 places. That's not the spirit of it. But I think the regulators are required to follow a complaint, and it will be the complaints that trigger the action. That some monitoring will be going on proactively. They will be looking at particular providers in sectors. They've said that's what they're going to do. But it's largely the case, I think, that a complaint will trigger this, and then the regulator will start looking at it. And if a complaint comes in multiple countries, then presumably there will be multiple instances. Quite how they do with that to be seen.
Did I answer the question from Anne-Marie Noon?
Of course.
Yeah, can I jump in? It's a good one. It kind of goes back to what I was saying in response to one of my answers earlier. But Anne-Marie Noon asks, should we have a policy for EAA within our own business, or should we look to put one together? I think here the point I would ask you to take away, Anne-Marie, is one, look to the formal documentation that you need in place. Two, having an internal policy, I think, sounds like a great idea, and certainly in respect of ensuring a routine review of the business's position in relation to its compliance at any one time. So I think, yes, practically policies can guide businesses excellently in ensuring that they're routine in thinking about these things, but the priority should be the documentation that the directive is expecting of businesses who are in scope.
I'm just going to insert a small commercial break to mention two things from AbilityNet. In terms of preparing a policy, we have a digital accessibility maturity model, which is at abilitynet.org.uk/DAM. That's a really great way of pulling together the beginnings of a policy. It will encompass the legal requirements and other things that you need to take account of, but it's looking at how you do it, and it helps you think there's a broader picture about what your policy should contain. That's a free download, and we also support our clients in working on that. The other one I was just going to mention, because it's in here, is if you do the testing, should you also be writing the documentation? It sort of depends on the situation. And we do work with customers on preparing their documentation, having audited their sites, but that depends on what they're looking for and how we can support them. So it depends on your relationship. You shouldn't necessarily, your web agency won't necessarily provide you with everything you need to do and just cut and paste it on. And if they do that, you might miss some important details. You definitely need to be involved in that process. Within AbilityNet, Alice mentioned, we're building a sort of a blueprint or a template for us to use with customers, because it's not one size fits all. And we can then work through it with them and just say, here's how we think it works. What do you think your answers are in these examples? So if you are working with an external company to do your testing, you would hope that they did have some knowledge and insights about the documentation required and can point you in the direction of anything that you're not clear about. So Just to be clear, it's not just an accessibility test result you're looking for here. There's a step on from that around policy and practice and whatever a template emerges as that, if that does come through, obviously that's what you'd hope that people would be using in that situation.
And just to add to that, that's hopefully what AbilityNet and Russell Cook, it's this sort of joint projects are going to do for you is provide you with, as I say, this one-stop shop. So, you know, essentially those compliance related questions relation to documentation or otherwise, if AbilityNet are unable to assist you with that, then we're available to jump in. Yeah, just to offer further reassurance.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, Louis, it's a good point about the fact that you need legal advice as well, because that's the point we said right at the beginning. If you want to know whether this is legal and compliant, that's a legal question which needs interpreting by someone with your experience. If you're looking at whether your site is accessible and the sorts of issues that you need to address, that's an accessibility question, and that's the sort of thing we help with. So that's why that twin approach is so important. They're not directly correlated. They are two elements of this bigger picture. There was another question in here I was just going to mention about information to share with others in your organization. I do think that there are some simple resources out there. There's some quick guides and things, and there's stuff on the AbilityNet website and others. And then there's also a need to engage people and sort of sit in a room and say, right, what are we going to do about this? And to realize that there is a distinct legal risk and there's a distinct commercial risk. But if you don't know whether you're in scope, then those questions are pretty redundant. So you've really got to start by working out how this affects you. If you have consumers in the EU, somebody mentioned the university and whether that would be covered. If people in the European Union can buy services from your website, you're in scope. I mean, that's the simplest one we started with. That's not 100% true, but it's not going to exempt you just because you're a university, for example. So do get some of those basics in mind when you're talking to people, because they do need to come over a bit more into the detail and understand a bit more about the risks and the nature of what they need to do.
A good question from an anonymous attendee. My service is a UK government digital service that could be used by EU citizens. How can I know what documentation is required, as I don't know which member states the users will be from? This idea when you're pushing a product or a service out there and not actually knowing where it's landing, that's a really important and excellent point to flag. And I suppose this is why a general declaration is so important, and making that specific, the nature of your service being, we don't quite know exactly where it's landing, being transparent and explicit about that. Obviously, a UK government department will also have public law duties on top of that, as well as equality duties as well, domestic duties as well. So the lots to think about there, which I'm sure there's an internal legal department that will be able to assist, hopefully.
Great. Well, look, I'm going to jump in. If we could have the next slide. I'm going to briefly round up and finish in the next couple of minutes. We've got lots of questions in here. Anything we haven't done, we'll reply to. But are you in scope is the beginning of this. And if this is the first one you've jumped into, then you've still got to go back to that one, I'm afraid, because that just dictates what is in scope and what you've got to do. Testing and standards will be relevant for you to understand how compliant you are and what you need to test and what standards you're working to. We've dodged that today, but the EN 301549, which it is the standard that's published that relates to the European Accessibility Act. We covered that in the second webinar. And then today, the message is get some documentation, start thinking about what you're going to say, and start digging into some of this detail to see how it relates to you. Yeah. So next slide, please. Also, we're not the only people, we're not the only organisation publishing EAA resources. There's lots of it around. They may answer different questions in different ways. The 3 parts of the webinars are now complete, so that will be published and on our website at any time. We've also got a hub with lots of resources we're putting together, and we have a guide that you can download, 5-step guide, which goes a bit more detail into some of these questions and also links out to the relevant parts of the website that we've mentioned for the documentation. So I want to say huge thank you to Alice and Louis. For the 3rd time in a row, we've realized there's quite a lot in here that isn't clear, but we've hopefully been as clear as we can about what's known and the current interpretation and that sort of language should draw everybody here and others across the line and say, right, we need to do something. Let's find out what it is. Are we in scope? If we are, let's start looking at our documentation so that we can present that within the next 4 or 5 weeks, because that's the deadline now. You can find out about our EA readiness service. As Louis mentioned, this is a combination of both accessibility and legal advice that matches whatever you're trying to do right now, and priced to suit, because it depends what you're looking for. You can download our readiness guide, and also we'll be publishing stuff. I think in the coming months, we'll be hearing more from monitoring authorities about what they're beginning to do. That's really the next phase that we're waiting to hear. We're talking to monitoring authorities now to find out how they think this is going to be implemented. They're beginning to talk to one another. So I think look out for that towards the end of the year. It's definitely what we're going to cover at TechShare Pro, is what are the monitoring authorities actually doing now that the law has been switched on. So thank you very much for everybody who attended, and I hope you found it useful. And do let us know in the feedback forms if there's anything else we could have done. And if you have any questions at any time, just drop them into AbilityNet and we'll do our best to answer them. We'll point you in the direction of resources that help you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
See you soon.
Thanks all. Bye.
Bye-bye.